person can, John F. Kennedy said, can make a difference, and every man should try.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried about the
How about louder, Bob, so people can hear us back?
I'm kind of worried about the power of political action committees once these senators and congressmen get to Washington. I mean, we look at the financial industry pouring billions into Congress. Our own, with a groundswell movement, with the over 60% in the Senate, we can't get anything done. Is it the Political Action Committee? Is it the lack of leadership? Obama has yet to make his first statement on financial responsibility. I hope he does something, perhaps, in the State of Union address. But right now, I don't see the leadership either in the White House. I'm sorry, I voted for him, I fought for him, and I don't see it in Congress.
I am co-sponsor of a bill for public financing of campaigns. I have a bill that I submitted, no one else co-sponsored it after I was disappointed. Actually, I was asked to pull it back by Rahm Emanuel to wait a few months. The first, when I went down there for an outside ethics committee that has subpoena power with retired judges, because I don't believe Congress members should not be like the IG, where people could report to them in the Navy and oversee us. I pulled it back while I was waiting for they promised there would be a bill. There was one. I felt it was inadequate, so I'm happy to send that bill. And the one that I worked with Bob Edgar of Common Cause for public financing campaign, you remove money and you do several things. You bring out that influence or the perception of that influence and at times the reality of it. And you also give me more time to do more work for the citizen. We do a lot already. So I agree with you. Take carried interest. I used this example before. I have voted 3 times to close down carried interest. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
If you're a hedge fund manager, they're the ones that made millions or billions over the last decade. Even though their money is not in the game invested, they manage wealthy people and pension funds, and they make great money. The commissions that accrue to them are taxed at 15% as capital gains tax, even though their money's not in the game. I've been given support by them, but I voted 3 times to close it down, and I don't get it quite like. But it's died in the Senate 3 times, Democrats included, Mr. Schumer, because New York City is the center of a lot of that. So I agree with him. I have pharmaceuticals in my district. You know my area is heavily pharmaceutical, but I voted for competition where in 2003, let me give you an example of what he's talking about. In 2000, and you know the examples, 2000, if I'm a vet, I used to say when I ran against Kurt Weldon, at the end of the campaign I said, I'll have an ulcer probably. And I'll go into the VA and pay $250, or this nation will pay, for Protonix to take care of my ulcer. If a senior goes into Medicare that year, Medicare will pay for the same ulcer of a senior $1,200 to the same company. Because slipped into that bill that Arlen and others voted for was a prohibition that Medicare could do what VA does, negotiate for best price. It's not that senators sit down and talk with one another behind closed doors. It's the influence of who might be in that room. I've done everything I've wanted to. By 1986, I commanded a ship. That's all I wanted to do. And I've been fortunate since then. But you are right. If we had public financing and campaigns, it'd be great because I'd have more time to do more. That's why I want it. I think a lot of people would be better served by there not being getting PACs. Question, please. Yes?
Yeah, Mr. Sestak, I discovered you on Hardball with Chris Matthews.
Many times.
And I follow you very, very fervently on MSNBC, and I try not to miss you. I feel like a lot of the problems we're having today is because of the economic situations with China. I feel like a third world country the last 30 years is almost at par with us. And I want to know what you're going to do
Yes.
once you're elected, once we show that Arlen Specter is a 10-face yo-yo. And I'm sorry, but I get very, very emotional about this because I feel our country really needs you. But how can we stop? We created China's economics. It's obvious. The way they're going in a few years, we're not going to be number one anymore.
Yes.
They're going to be number one. Unless your generation in the Senate stops them. What are you planning on doing to stop them?
I want to say thanks. That's the first time I've had that question. And it's the first time I've had that question in months. Months. China is where has to be where strategically we focus this century. Even the global war of terror is a tactical issue. That tragic war in Iraq so hurt us because Afghanistan then slipped so far downward. And Pakistan now is Al-Qaeda with a safe haven. We could have been done the job. China owns foreign nations own over 55% of our national debt. I can remember sitting in the White House the day the decision was made to move, because I was Director of Defense Policy. And I remember Tony Lake, the first year I got there, walking out, the National Security Advisor, from a Situation Room meeting saying, what's our China strategy? What's our China strategy? And trying to get it right, if I could, because this... And number two, I can remember sitting there one day as the decision was made to move carriers off of Taiwan, because they were raining missiles north and south of the island of Taiwan. We moved those, and they stopped. Today, what would they do? Do you remember what happened a year and a half or about a year ago? And they said, we think we might move some of our $1 trillion in reserves over into the euro. The market plummeted hundreds of points. This is truly where the center has to be of our strategic focus. And that's why Iraq also harmed. It wasn't just a wrong war. It harmed us from being focused on it. China's growing 8.5% this year. Next year, they're going to go up 9.2% according to most economic modeling. You're right, my doctor is a little economy. I don't want to know the facts. We are going to probably grow next year, maybe 2.5 if we don't put more tax incentives and inducements in for small businesses and guarantee community banks' roles. What has to be done is not a military issue. It's actually recognizing that they're beating us at our own game. Their president and prime minister have been to Africa 7 times. We've had 1 visit. They're doing all sorts of building there in order to establish engagement for the resources. First off, this president was dealt a pretty weak hand because in the years that ensued while we did nothing, China has risen to where it's almost the United States and China at Copenhagen, and everybody else is here. I'm not about putting China down at all. I backpacked through China for 45 days in 1986 when it was purely communist because I wanted to know what that country was like as a military officer. I literally backpacked the first year they let independent travel by Americans. Flew to Beijing, came out 45 days later in Hong Kong. First off, we have to understand that financially, if we do not get our national debt under control, I'm supportive of the economic stimulus bill and what we've done because Specter with his vote and others torpedoed our ship and we were sinking, we had to caulk the holes. But we have to return to what President Clinton had, a pay-as-you-go government. Number two, we've got to close all those tax loopholes. The $80 billion that go to tax, literally $80 billion to fossil fuel. That carried interest, which I think is about $79 billion that I talked about. But getting our national debt under control, sir, is probably the first, is the long-term most important thing with the exception of education. Everybody here knows the facts, how many more engineers they graduate from that. They come here and we teach them, and there's nothing wrong with that. But because of the failure, our failure, to invest properly in STEM